let's wrap up the NFC South with the Carolina Panthers. It was interesting. After 2 weeks, we thought we might be talking about them needing another quarterback, but hey, they at least have Bryce Young with the way he played down the stretch. I think the attention turns to the defense. Certainly one of the worst pass rushes in the entire NFL last year. They've got pick number 8. They've already been linked to every single defensive lineman in this draft who's capable of going in the top 10. There's probably a discussion about Tetairoa McMillan as a pass catcher for Bryce Young, because on paper the pass catchers aren't great for the Panthers, but that does feel like the big priority this offseason: rushing the passer, probably stopping the run too, and then weapons for Bryce Young.
Yeah, I mean, that defense was was atrocious last year. So outside of a couple of random games where they decided to show up and be way better than they had any reason to be, but so I think the first kind of philosophical question for them as a building this offseason is: are we focusing on, now that we've somehow gotten Bryce Young back on track and we're seeing Alabama Bryce Young as opposed to the guy that was struggling for the first year in a couple of games, is our strategy now to try and maximize the return of what we're getting from Bryce Young and try and, surround him with as many receiving weapons as possible? And because the line is good, like, are we trying to get the best version of Bryce Young we can possibly get? Or do we look at this and say, well, that moved the needle more than anything else we can do already, so now let's really attack the biggest weakness, which is the defense?
I think you have to build the entire team. I feel like we do have these debates every year, and where do you spend your draft capital? You got to build the best team, and the defense. I mean, they showed flashes at times, and had some good little stretches here and there, but bottom line was they struggled up front. They had Derek Brown hurt very early last season, so he'll come back, but they need some sort of juice off the edge. I think that was pretty clear. Outside of a couple games, it was almost negligible as far as the pass rush goes. And I think, again, draft wise, it's a good spot to get somebody. It's a good spot to get somebody at 8. It's a good spot to trade down to 15 and still get somebody. So I think they've got some options to really replenish on the defensive line. So this is the 29th straight team I've said replenish the defensive line, do it in the draft. I do think the discussion about the receivers is a good one, right? I mean, last year we said, look, you can pick 3 potential elite prospects in Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze. But there's a drop-off between that. There's depth, but there's a drop-off, theoretically, between the next tier of guys. Is there a drop-off between the Tetairoa McMillans of the world, or just McMillan, maybe? Is there a drop-off between him and, I don't know, Jalen Royals in the second? I don't know that there is this year. So I think there's a great opportunity here for the Panthers to, get one of those pass rushers early and then come back later in the draft, still be able to pick up some potential weapons here for Bryce Young.
Yeah, but then the other question is also like, okay, this receiving core might be okay. Like, Adam Thielen had a resurgence. Jalen Coker looks like an absolute find, an undrafted guy they've stumbled onto. Xavier Legette, their first round draft pick, has not shown anything really yet. But you're looking at this roster and you're saying, like, there's no number one wide receiver there right now. Now, maybe, I mean, Legette is supposed to be that guy eventually, but has shown very little sign of being that so far. So if you believe, again, this is all down to like individual draft evals, right? Talked about it with the Falcons, or whether they think Jalen Walker is that guy. Like, if Carolina thinks that Tetairoa McMillan is that alpha number one wide receiver, do you pass on that because the next guy on most consensus boards is Luther Burden, and he's not really that kind of guy? And you might not have, it's a big step potentially from that to other guys. Do you pass on that, who could immediately be your number one wide receiver? Now suddenly a receiving core with McMillan, with Jalen Coker as a number 2, with Adam Thielen as your third guy, that starts to look really, really good. But you're passing up the impact edge rusher, right? Or do you say, we'll make it work with receiver? Look, Bryce Young was already balling with this group last year. We still have faith that Legette is going to be the guy. Let's take the best defensive player because the defensive side is a mess, and know that we're potentially passing up the one, like, number one guy that's in the draft.
I think part of that depends on what happens in free agency, right? I mean, you have on the defensive front, you have Derek Brown, Jadeveon Clowney is back, but next to Derek Brown is Shai Tuttle, who now has a total of 7 pressures across the last 2 seasons as a starter. 2 seasons with 7 pressures. So it depends on where they are in the free agent market, right? They're probably going to play in the Milton Williams, Osa Odighizuwa type of sweepstakes, so to speak. So I think it depends on what happens there. If they can, if they pick up a Josh Sweat, a Milton Williams, a Diggy Zua, if they get one of those guys early, the McMillan thing is tempting. Like it is tempting. You know, I'm all about flood the field with 4 playmakers and good luck trying to cover it. And plus they have good group of backs with Chuba Hubbard and hopefully Jonathan Brooks coming back healthy at some point in life. So yeah, I'm about that conversation, but as of right now, it does feel like the draft is shaping up for them to get the defensive line help that they need.
I don't want to turn this too negative, right? But the Shy Tuttle thing, there are players that might only get a handful of pressures, and it's okay because they're like 360 pounds and all they do is play run defense and, stuff the run and don't really feature on passing downs. That's not Tuttle. Like, number one, he's not that type of player. Number two,
what he's supposed to be. That's what he's supposed to be, but he's not great at that either.
That's what I'm saying. Number two, he's been bad against the run. Number one, he's like a 300 pounder as opposed to like a 350 pound 2-gapping run stuffing nose tackle that just occupies space. I mean, not good.
No, that's what I'm saying. They need interior defensive line help. They need edge rush help. They lose their starting corner. They picked up Mike Jackson late, right before training camp. He did a nice job. I've paired Mike Jackson with some other teams as a nice little potential buy low, maybe ascending in his career. But so they need a starting corner and 2 starting safeties. So look, it wasn't a great roster the last couple of years, and they've got some work to do. And I think a lot of that work is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe you play a little second wave of wide receiver free agency or Darius Slayton as a deep threat who we've liked to pair with some people. But I think a lot of the work is going to be on the defensive side of the ball here for the Panthers.
Remember when they made the trade up to go get Bryce Young, they gave up a lot to make it happen. And it was like, look, it's the kind of balancing act with that kind of move. It's great on the one hand to be aggressive and go get your guy, but you also have to bear in mind what you're giving up to make that happen. And DJ Moore was the most obvious sort of example of what you're giving up, but they also gave up draft picks. So they didn't have much to kind of repopulate the roster. But this year they've got a lot of draft picks. Like, they've done a good job of getting back on the positive side of that ledger. So they're going to have a lot of swings. They've got 2 picks in the 4th round, 3 in the 5th round. They can add a lot of players in the draft this year.
Yeah, the second rounder that they got from the Rams too is because the Rams loved Braden Fisk and essentially gave up 2 second rounders for Fisk. Right. Used one and gave up this year. So that was a good move by the Panthers to replenish the 2 that they gave up for one of the picks they gave up in the Bryce Young deal. So yeah, I think they're in a good spot to reset things. I think doubling up at edge and interior defensive line in the draft makes sense. Playing in free agency with some of those top edges or interior defensive linemen also makes sense. And I'd keep my eyes peeled for the receivers. I mean, we haven't mentioned, as far as receivers go, we have not mentioned Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, or Nuke Hopkins as options for a lot of teams. You were on record saying you would have, tried to pair Nuke Hopkins with Bryce maybe last year, heading into last year as an option just to help his development or whatever it might be.
Was it last year or was it 2 years ago I wanted to do that?
Probably would have been 2 years ago when he was a rookie. Sorry, 2 years ago. Would you play that game? Cooper's Diggs is coming off the injury, and out of the 3, I think Diggs still looks like the best player, but he's kind of running himself out of Buffalo, and Cooper didn't look great. Hopkins I thought would produce more with Mahomes and the Chiefs, and he didn't. Would you grab one of those former number ones and see if they're going to help as well?
I mean, look, it always depends on what the contract looks like. Like, I'd at least find out what the deal looks like. Cooper would be interesting because this is another team, a little bit like Buffalo, where everybody on it is not necessarily an X wide receiver that can win one-on-one on the outside. That's still theoretically the area where Cooper can do that, just inconsistently at this point. So I would be intrigued in what Amari Cooper would look like in this group. I think he would definitely add something to the group. I'm not sure Hopkins brings you anything that's not already there. I'm not sure Stephon Diggs does coming off that injury. Maybe, like, if he looks amazing coming back off that injury, fair enough. You're also dealing with Stephon Diggs brings some baggage with him that might not be a beneficial thing to bring into this building. I mean, Buffalo voluntarily got rid of the only guy on the roster that could be that X receiver, because even though he'd made a difference in a positive direction for them, because they were just sort of sick of it, right? Houston immediately reworked his contract to ensure that he would only be there for 1 year. They were not going to entertain keeping him around for any longer than that. So I'm not sure I'd be falling over myself to bring him into the building for that alone. Cooper, I'd be interested in. The other guy, we haven't mentioned him, I don't think, yet in this sort of whole free agent discussion saga. But he's not. He's a receiver, but he's a very unusual one. But he's maybe the best return man in the game. Kevontae Turpin is a free agent. Number one, you add the best return man in the game to the roster, and number two, there's a gimmick role and there's definitely a gimmick role and a deep threat role that Kevontae Turpin can bring to a team.
I like that. I'll buy that for Carolina. Turpin, draft defensive lineman, multiple. We'll figure out corner at some point here. Second wave of safeties, the usual there. Kind of let that thing play out and then fill in your safety spots. Corner is the only other place that I would have some concerns getting that, long-term starter, say opposite J.C. Horn. The one thing we didn't do is give the Panthers Ashton Genty at number 8. I forgot that was the obligation. If you imagine Ashton Genty, Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, and Jonathan Brooks, how do you stop that offense?
How do you stop it? Who's stopping this offense?
Who's stopping this offense? All right, did we fix the Panthers?
Yeah, pretty much. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.